Welcome. I'm Ty Edwards. You are at, of course, the Vietnam-era Veterans Oral History Project, a panel discussion. I want to welcome you. I'm director of the Kansas Studies Institute, which is part of this project today, and I want to deeply thank my colleague, Kenna Zumalt, walking around in the red with the cards she's giving to all of you. We collaborated on this project together, and in my opinion, Kenna is an invaluable resource to the college, and I just found out from Donnie Witten that she's going to be receiving an award, for her service to veterans and our veteran community. So her work is deeply important at the college. As you can see, some of you got the email about this, and it's the bottom logo there on my slide. This is part of the Polsky Practical Enrichment Series. This series was established at the college in 1997 and is underwritten by the Norman and Elaine Polsky Family Supporting Foundation in partnership with our JCCC Foundation. This series seeks to educate and empower the public in areas of education, health, wellness, and financial stability. And Norman Polsky also was a veteran. He served as an infantry officer in the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II. So this is part of that series and part of that work. This event, you can also see here the Humanities Kansas logo. This event is also sponsored by Humanities Kansas in partnership with the Veteran History Project at the Library of Congress and the Veterans Voices Writing Project. You may know this is the 50 years, right, since the escalation of the war in Vietnam in 1968. And Humanities Kansas has partnered with 12 organizations, of which Kansas Studies Institute is one, for a statewide oral history project entitled Kansas Stories of the Vietnam War. As part of this project, we conducted oral history interviews with some of the people you're going to meet tonight. And those will be archived in our library's digital holdings. And one other event that we're having tomorrow, in case you're like, you know what, tomorrow at 3 I'm going to be hungry. And while I'm hungry, I think I would like to do some writing. We are going to have a veterans writing workshop tomorrow in JCCC's CoLab. Join your peers in a free writing workshop led by our colleague, Dr. Nathan Jones. He's a professor of English and a U.S. Army veteran. This workshop will assist you in reflecting upon your military service through collaborative writing. You can keep your writings. We'll also talk about publication at the workshop. No writing experience is needed, and heavy appetizers and drinks will be served. So if you want to come by that, or if you'd like to even RSVP ahead, you can there at Kansas Studies. But again, it's free, so any veteran that wants to participate, our goal is to sort of use writing skills to help you, you can frame your veteran experience in terms of your career goals. All right, so our participants today are all current or former JCCC staff members. When Kenna and I applied for this grant, one of the things that was important to us was using this grant project as service to the institution. So we interviewed Vietnam-era veterans that work at the college or recently retired from the college, and they are with us today. So we have Robert Robbins, and David and Wendy Swada.
That's good enough.
Yes! And then Larry Stanfield, you're going to see video from him today. He could not be with us today, but we're going to see video and clips from his interview as well. And then also another really important part of our project when Kenna and I were working together and when we applied for this grant was to have our student veterans conduct the interviews with our Vietnam-era veterans. So I want to acknowledge Donnie Witten and Heidi Lopez, who are both here today. They are also both veterans, and they were trained by the grant and by the Library of Congress in doing oral history interviews, and you will not see them so much as maybe a little bit hear them in the video clips that you're going to see. But thank you for that work, too. A big part of this project is serving our multi-generational veterans. I also want to thank JCCC Video Services, who did all of the video work you're about to see, which is excellent. And I want to thank Barry Bailey with the library. These videos have been fully digitized, fully transcript, fully closed captioned, and then included in our library's digital holdings for future research, which was one of my goals, is that we would have these resources available long term. And then last but not least, our moderator tonight is Dr. Rachel Gosen, Washburn University. She is a 20th century social historian and peace historian, and here is some super exciting stuff. In the summer of 2016, she traveled to Vietnam as part of a sabbatical with Washburn, and she was visiting significant locations related to this war and this era. And she was learning about how the Vietnamese people today memorialize and remember the war, which is so directly connected to what we're doing. So that's really great. And then when she returned from that sabbatical, she taught a course at Washburn called Remembering Vietnam, which focused on helping students develop a historical basis for understanding the war, including its origins, longevity, and consequences, and then analyzing diverse perspectives regarding American involvement by using personal narratives, guest speakers, nonfiction, fiction, film, and art to help students increase their geographical knowledge of Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And if you happen to be a Washburn student or are thinking about becoming a Washburn student, she'll be teaching this class again in the spring. Yes, so you could enroll in it again, which is directly connected to our work. So I also want to thank her for coming. And I believe my colleague Kenna passed out some of the cards for you. We want to make sure we get to everyone's questions if we can at the end. So if you have questions as we're going through, feel free to write them down, and then Kenna and I will come around and try to collect them, and hopefully that way we can get through everybody's questions or consolidate some that are of similar subject matter. So with that really long introduction, we are now going to transfer over, and you can tell me whenever you're ready for me to play videos.
Okay.
And I will show you clips and we will discuss.
Okay, great. Ty, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for coming out. It's really an honor for me to be here tonight for this Vietnam era veterans panel. I'm going to talk just a little bit about Dave and Wendy first, because it'll be a set of about 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes of clips that we'll see of them first. And after we watch those clips, I'll have a couple questions for them, and then we'll move on through the evening, similarly also with Robert. Dave was in the Navy and had a career as an officer for more than 22 years. Initially, he was a radio officer. He had a very significant interest in flying airplanes and had started an officer candidate school in the spring of 1974. He met his wife, Wendy, in 1977 at the Officers Club in Virginia Beach, and Wendy is from Virginia Beach. And his first story that we'll see here relates to an event soon after their honeymoon. So this is actually a little bit later in the 70s when he was in Europe flying and she was back home in Virginia Beach. He was shot out of the sky and had to eject to safety, and she got notified about this while she was back home in Virginia. So that's the first clip we're going to see. Then there are a couple additional clips we'll continue to watch, and then we'll have a little conversation with them.
All right, here we go.
We pulled back after getting back from Germany. I met the ship back in Spain, and a friend of mine, one of my best friends, a guy named Sammy, and I will use Sammy's name because he and I, he was in our wedding and I was in his wedding, godfather each other's kids. Sammy and I are flying. It's August 17th of 1978, and if you fly from an aircraft carrier, one of the best flights you can ever get, because landing at night is always a pretty superior experience. And we were taking off right before sunset. We were going to fly around. It was a beautiful full moon night with not a cloud in the sky, just what you want to land on, okay? And we're landing right after sunset. Well, on the last intercept, and that's what you do on almost things, you go out there flying back and forth. You always carry live weapons, okay? Well, through a switchology problem by the guy, our flight lead, he messed up his switches and he shot our airplane out of the sky. We're flying around. My call sign is fly, so you might hear, so we're flying, and next thing we hear is brake starboard, eject, eject. Guy I'm flying with, Sammy, goes, hey, fly, is that for us? And then the missile hit us in the back, hits our starboard engine, flips us upside down, and we're at 12,000 feet, and so I had to eject, pulled the handle. There's no doubt in my mind something was wrong, and we both thought we'd had a midair. Somebody hit us, and we ejected, and it's a great sea story there at that point there. Now it's just everything works for your training. You go back, follow the training you had. You come down, you get in your chute, you get in your raft. Sun goes down, moon comes up, helicopter comes pick you up, and go back to the ship, and then find out what the story is. In fact, on my I Love Me wall, I've got what's called the pigtail from the missile that shot us down back at home on display. But you was asked that because that's what this patch is. That's from Martin Baker. If you eject, you get a tie and a letter and a patch. Yeah, I can also, if I want to spend $5,000, get a watch that says I ejected. I don't want a $5,000 watch that says I ejected.
But Martin Baker is who made the ejection seat.
So now back to her side of the story again. Now we're newlyweds, and she's back in Virginia Beach now.
I'm back in Virginia Beach because I'm back home, and
but I'm back. Stacy, the guy that got her phone number, he's at this time he's finished up he's got a little left in the Navy, but he's not on tour on the fleet with us now. He's not out on cruise because he's getting ready to get out of the Navy. He's the duty officer for the air wing that night when this happens.
And back in the day, they still may have officers' wives clubs or officer spouses clubs. And the president of the officers' wives club was always the commanding officer of the group. But in this case, the XO's wife decided to call every wife in our squadron to say that the Forrestal had lost an airplane. And she'd get us more details later. So Stacy then calls and said,
well, she doesn't tell. What she doesn't tell me. What she basically says is, like, Forrestal lost an airplane. We don't know who was in it. We don't know if they're alive or dead.
yeah, we don't know anything more details. Stay tuned.
So chances 1 in 70, it's your husband.
Yeah.
1 in 80.
So Stacy calls and says, it was Dave. Let me go in, find out more details. So Stacy goes in, finds out that they're both fine. There was no mortalities. I'm still a wife, not a widow. And so I'm okay that night. The XO's wife did not call any of the other wives back until the next day to let them know who had actually ejected. So when I go to the next wives club meeting and start telling the story and then said, oh, and when I found out that night that it was Dave, I think every woman wanted to kill me because they didn't know until the next day that it wasn't their husband. And so that was a definite learning experience within the wives clubs of what not to do. You don't call everyone until you have details. And so that was something that actually was written up, because there were so many angry women about that. They didn't know whether their husbands were alive or dead. And you don't know that for 12, 15 hours. And that's not something you deal with well.
I can make it really exciting, but it ended up great. And those of us the gentleman that shot, I'll use his name. He was an Air Force exchange pilot, a guy named Jim Simons, and Jim has passed away in '85. He was a golden boy too, because they wouldn't put in a Air Force exchange to us. He was former Thunderbird Academy. He was going all the way. He'd been selected for astronaut training, and when this happened, of course, his career was over. And he ended up finally getting astronaut training, and he was a competitive aerobatics pilot. He had his own little aerobatic, and it crashed on him. A control rod broke. 1985, he got killed. Yeah. But the other three of us that were involved in it, we still talk to each other. Sammy and I.
They all call each other on their anniversary.
This August 17th will be the 40th anniversary, so we'll call and we'll say, hey,
drink a beer, we're all still alive.
and, which is rare, just because of the age of 40 years.
Yeah. So
that was that, and then you asked some things real quick go back to the full career. So I joined in 1974. Okay, first squadron was VF-74 in the East Coast, which is Oceana, Virginia. From there, we go to be a flight instructor in Pensacola, Florida for nearly 3 years. In those days, a set of flying orders was 30 months. Okay, so I get 30 months at Pensacola. And are you familiar with? I don't know. You say you're a reservist?
I was.
Okay. I became at that time what they would now call the term full-time support. What we'd call a TAR officer. Okay, TAR, Training Administration of the Reserve. So while I'm a full-timer, I'm keeping my reserve commission. I had got 2 letters right after the accident. One saying you've been augmented, which means you can become regular Navy, or second, you can become a TAR and stay full-time, as a reservist. And talk to of course, you talk to your department heads. I'm a young ensign, what do I do? And they said, well, do you want to do this for a living, based on an aircraft carrier? Well, not really. And they said, well, do this, and you get to fly, and you'll stay you'll stay full time. So I just did that. So instantly they sent me a set of orders to a regular Navy squadron, which is a flight instructor. And from there they called up. I mean, the detailer were really crying. They needed people because the Phantom was going away. They'd gone primarily to F-14s, but they had 2 squadrons in Japan. And this would be probably late summer of '79.
Yeah.
Because no, I'm sorry, 81, because you're pregnant with David.
Yeah.
And they asked if I'd go to Japan, and foolishly I said yes. Company says when they ask you, you're going to go. I mean, they make sure they play on. But it ended up being the best 3 years of our lives. I would say, looking back, at the time it was the 3 most miserable, but it's probably the 3 best. And so I went to Japan to Fighter Squadron 151 on USS Midway. From there, I went to Naval Air Station Dallas, and then to a reserve squadron to fly there, and transitioned to the F-14. Flew with F-14 a little bit. From there, I went to the Pentagon, which made me a real career move, because I'm not going to go back to ever do that again. You do it once and you'll never want to do it again. And then I was sent out here as commanding officer of Naval Air Reserve out at Gardner's, the old air station. The Navy kept part of that at the time. We kept about, I'm going to say 20 acres, probably about 8 to 10 buildings, and we trained reservists. I was commanding officer of the Air Reserve Center, and we closed. And I was the third to the last and the last because a friend of mine took it over from me, and I then, in 1996, I told the, actually 95, probably more than that, but 94, 95, I told the Navy I didn't want to promote to captain, and I just soon retire. They let me stay out here. I did because, well, they told me I was going back to D.C. and the head of the headquarters is in New Orleans. I didn't want to go to New Orleans with 2 kids. Kids are in high school. That was the big thing. Our son was getting ready to start high school, and we decided, well, it's time to retire. You know, it's as good as any. So I did that. Came work here part-time at JCCC because I'm not going to go sit inside of a
Cubicle.
a cubicle and type. It's just, I can't. I did it once, and that was enough. So there's 22 years in 2 minutes. Yeah. But no, the war itself, I mean, it's so hard to describe just how contagious it was. I mean, early on, I remember we talked about the high school reunion, but I remember when I was a sophomore in high school in 1965, and we were talking about, do you think it'll still be going on by the time we get out? Getting out of high school. And people, no, there's no way. This can't keep going on. Of course, then it keeps going on and keeps going on. And you go to that wall, and anybody my age group has friends on that wall. I mean, most people. But I'll go up there, and you know, I see Ricky and Malin. I'll see their names on there, and you know, and now, well, kind of what for? You know, in fact, we were there this last time. We go to D.C. When I was there, I couldn't stand D.C. And now I love to go visit. And of course, I can't go up there without going to visit the memorial. And but there were some people there that walked around. And one young says, "Yeah, sure were a lot of wasted lives." And I said, "Every one of these was. I mean, in the big picture, there's 58,000 names. That, you know, looking back, why?" And I know you probably talk to people here. You know, they're all going to have different things, but you know, and they're all proud of their service as well. They should be. But I think some of them feel betrayed. I know we'll go someplace to go to cruises on a cruise someplace. I'll always have veterans get together. And the Vietnam vets are very, you know, you might have a few Korean vets, a few that are left, but the Vietnam vets, they feel that they were really let down by their government. Okay, not so much people, you know, they talk about the medical problems they have right now. They're not getting help, you know, and those things, and they're very, very, you know, as I say, hurt. You know, they were dragged away forcefully. You know, it's called a draft. Okay, they didn't sign up, and they were forced to do that. And then to not be treated probably as well as they should have been treated, you know. So yeah, it was very contentious where I was. I mean, even in deep darkest, you know, red Texas, it was, you know, why are we doing this? You know, what's going on? And by 1970, I think everybody realized that, well, we probably shouldn't be doing it anymore. You know, I joined the Navy after still had people over there. The one thing that did affect us, we were picking up, even on Midway, you'd pick up people, you know, the boat people. There'd be people, you know, leaving Vietnam, and you stop, and they'd be on a boat, and you pick them up because people were trying to get out of that part of the world, and that went on for quite a while after the war. But yeah, it's not fun to talk about. It really isn't. I mean, it's you know, to watch people get drafted, you know, until you sit there and had that fear over you. You know, we were all watching that. I remember that draft lottery.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine in college, he was draft lottery number 2. He was drafted. Got lucky. He went to Germany. You know, he didn't have to go to Vietnam. Just out of pure luck. And I got lucky, got number 321. You know, and I'm sure that if I'd have gotten a low draft number, I'd have enlisted in the Navy, because you could, you know, a lot of people, you know, if you volunteer for the Navy or the Air Force, you didn't have to go be a ground pounder. And with almost a college degree, they would have taken you right away.
Definitely. It's interesting, though, how it's something that resonates with everyone and will for a very long time. But it's interesting how you say that for you, that people in your age group you mentioned have someone that they lost.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
You can't
Oh,
not. You know, it's just,
Guys I dated in high school,
yeah.
at least one of them is on the wall.
And I imagine that you guys have family, friends.
You know, it goes on.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it happened. It was 50 years ago, 40 years ago. You know, we talked about it. 50 years ago was 68. Was it not 68? But you know, I can't say it is what it is, but it's what the, you know, leadership decided to do it. And like you said, you salute and say yes, sir. You people forgetting, in 1966 it was not unpopular. You know, it was a very popular thing. It's gonna be 68 and on once the music starts to get the Vietnam era. In fact, I get a little upset. We love dinner theater and musicals, and there's a real nice kind of cabaret downtown that we like to go to, and they were doing music from the '60s, you know, and they put, and as I tell them, how can you not have some of the world's best protest music on it? You know, you can't not do it. How can you not have, you know, Glenn Galveston, one of the best anti-war songs ever written, but you know, and a big hit song in the late '60s, and you know, you can't talk about the '60s and not talk about Vietnam. And two things: the Vietnam and the space program. For heaven's sakes, they were real big those years.
Yeah.
I mean, let's don't talk all about the Beach Boys. You know, I'm sorry, but there were some big things going on back then. And like I said, in '68, orbiting the moon saved it all. You know, as perspective of class of '68. You know, you had to have gone through there. You had to know the feeling of when Bobby gets murdered. You know, how people really felt because of that, and it was a real shock.
I can imagine hearing it on the news for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. And even though, you know, the TV wasn't as good, and, you know, it's still, when the news flash came up about, you know, Martin Luther King being killed, you know, the unrest that occurred, just, you know, what's going to happen? Are there going to be riots? You know, who, what, when, where? You know, Bobby. Just the, you know, not knowing, everybody's on edge. There's just that little bit of unhappiness, on edge. You know, my younger brother was also, you know, we all sat at the television, what number is he going to get? You know, because there was always anger in my family with, you know, my father was he was in the Merchant Marine in World War II, you know, and he's like, you know, my son's going to serve, you know, and my mother's like, he's going to Canada, you know. So there was a few fights in our house. Thankfully, his draft number was very low, and we didn't have to worry about that. But, you know,
Actually, very high.
very high number. I'm sorry, very high number. It was low on the list of getting called, and so, you know, it affected everybody. Your family, how they felt about politics, how they felt about everything. At school, you know, like I said, there was a guy that I dated that went to Vietnam and didn't come back. You know, obviously a lot before I met him, but yeah, it really. And growing up in Virginia Beach, especially with the military community there between Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Langley over at Newport News, it was a very heavy military community. And most of the time, you know, it was like, yeah. And then it was like, we're tired of this. And you could see it with everybody, with the military community. Of course, these guys are flying and they're having fun, but it's like, do we really want to go over there and fight? You know, so. And like I said, one of my very best friends in high school, her dad was killed over in Vietnam while we were in high school. And it was just, you know, it kind of brought everything home.
So thanks a lot for the stories. And of course, as we mentioned, this is part of a much longer interview with you. And as Ty said, if people want to view the full interviews, they're available on the internet and through YouTube. So that's an opportunity. This oral history project is part of a much larger oral history project. Even the Library of Congress has been interviewing veterans and people associated with veterans for some years. I was curious if either of you had ever been interviewed about your experiences prior to this project, and whether you had or not, how that made you feel to be interviewed about some of your past experiences.
Well, I never had before, and I know we got an email probably in July. Kenneth sent out an email to us, you know, wanting to know if we would like to, you know, to partake in this. And I went and talked to her, and I said, well, I'm not a Vietnam vet. I'm Vietnam era. You know, I'm going to come in right as the war is spinning down. You know, I had no thing there. And she said, well, that's fine. We'd like to, you know, have your story. And I said, okay, great. Well, tell me what you want to do. And as right as I was walking out, I said, well, wait a second. It's not my story. I said, it's our story. I meet her over there now. For the next, you know, for 18, 19 years, she's going to travel around being drug around by me, you know, having to put up with all the stuff. Again, it's hard to imagine. I get it all the time. You know, I'll hear some lady complaining about a child, okay, and the baby's hard to raise. I said, well, you know, you don't have two babies that are a year apart, and you're living in a foreign country in Japan, and your husband's out at sea, and that's what she had to do. Okay, so I said, it's our story. We have to put up with the whole thing, and as we said, I got to fly jets and have a great time, and she had to put up with it. But no, we've never been asked before for an official interview. Do we tell a lot of sea stories? Well, yeah, you bet we do. That just comes with it.
Yeah, very much so.
And you go along to reunions, do you, when there is this something that both of you do together?
They do have a lot of reunions with the different squadrons that he was based in, and even with the Officers Candidate School. And yes, I love going to the reunions. First of all, we get to see friends that we were close to during our time in the military, and it's fun to hear the stories because they get better through the years.
Another thing I was thinking about is that toward the end of the Vietnam War, by 1973 or so, the draft was ending, and we have not had a draft since then, but there has been certainly talk over the years, sometimes it ebb and flows, about some people's desire to have a national program for young people that they would volunteer to give some time to their country. It might take the form of something like AmeriCorps or some other kind of voluntary service. And I'm wondering if either of you have ever thought, would something like that be desirable, or are you content with how things are now? If people want to volunteer, they can volunteer, but there's no sort of expectation that all young people have to. I'm just wondering your views on that.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll talk. The draft, I mean, was it contentious? You bet it was. I mean, until you sat there and had that done to you, at the time everybody was anti the draft. The founders of this country, when they wrote the Constitution, they specifically said there would be no standing army. If you read, the Article 1, the Congress can raise an army and maintain a navy. That's the way it was written. So they specifically kind of leaned toward having a draft. I mean, that's how else are you going to raise an army? It was a big deal in the early 70s when it went to all volunteer. I think, this is just me personally, that now you see some of the problems of an all volunteer army. It's very easy to send that army any place you want it to. Very easy. And it doesn't affect, I hope I'll step on anybody's toes here, but I don't know how many people from Blue Valley, the young high school age kids, went to fight over in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay? Because of that, there's no real, who cares so much about the war? If we'd taken your son at 18 years old right out of high school and said, guess what, we're going to go to Afghanistan, you might not be quite so happy and say, yeah, let's go fight a war. So yeah, do I think there ought to be a draft? Yeah, back then, no, because it affected me. Now, probably I wasn't very smart back then. Some kind of national service. I mean, it's just, that's, I bet you any veteran around here, it's an all-volunteer force, but you don't get a real cut of society with an all-volunteer force. You need the whole group. And we very easily, took over, conquered Germany, conquered Japan with a bunch of draftees. That's what we did. So yeah, I would say yes.
Thanks. I don't know, Wendy, have you given that any thought? And
Gave it a little bit of thought. And I echo a lot of what Dave says. The draft had such a bad feeling for so many of us. But the idea of some sort of mandatory service for a year between high school and college, I think lets a lot of people get that year of finding out more about themselves, what they can do. I didn't realize how strong a person I was until I became a Navy wife and found out that I could raise 2 kids in a foreign country. So sometimes doing things outside your comfort zone are things that you need to do to really find out how strong you are, and a year of service is not a bad idea.
okay, great, thanks so much. And I'll have the two of you come here and let me just say a couple of words about the next clip we're going to see. So let you come through.
And I do want to say to students who are here, I do have a sheet for you to sign in at the end, in case someone wants a record of your attendance.
The next clips that we're going to be seeing are of a veteran who couldn't be here tonight, but he does work here at the college. His name is Larry Stanfield. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy and did basic training in 1969, and he served in the Navy for 4 years. During that time, he was based in San Diego, and he had deployments in the Pacific. Naval aviation was his interest. He had trained to be an electronics technician on an aircraft carrier on the USS Ticonderoga, which had been built during World War II. So we're going to hear him a little bit on that topic. He earlier had worked for the Postal Service, and then when he finished his service, he continued to work for the Postal Service, and I believe has worked in that capacity here on campus as well. So we'll see some short segments from Larry as well.
You know, just the getting up with the trash cans being thrown down the middle of the barracks was, you know, that was a good alarm clock to wake, you know, get you going, get you hustling. But after a while, you know, you learn a lot. There's a lot of things to learn that you know didn't think you had interest in, but there's a lot of survival skills you learn, and how to live on your own, and you know, and be independent, I guess.
What was the most challenging portion of your service, would you say?
Probably the long deployment that we had. It was about 8 months. We were out in the Pacific, Westpac, and most of the time it was at sea, but we did go to different ports over in Japan and Hong Kong, Singapore, a few places like that. But not knowing, because our schedule was changing all the time, where we're going to a war zone, or we got deployed to do something else. Just kind of the unknown was the most challenging part of it. Not knowing, for sure when we're coming back, but maybe we'll get diverted or changed to go some other mission or something like that. But that was about the most challenging.
Were you on an aircraft carrier?
I was on the USS Ticonderoga.
And what is that?
It's an aircraft carrier. It's an old World War II aircraft carrier. They converted to an angled deck carrier to become it was an attack carrier early in the Vietnam War, and then they changed it toward the end of the Vietnam War to be more of a supportive aircraft carrier.
What's it like being at sea?
Busy and relaxing. Times when operations weren't going on, I worked the flight deck, and when times weren't going on, any flight ops or anything like that, you did have some free time, and sit around, just you could read. They had movies and things like that too, but we had a shop that we did some work in, and then when you did have your free time, you just sat back and on the balcony and relaxed. It was nice, but we were very cramped. It was since it was an older aircraft carrier, wasn't we didn't have the sleeping accommodations like they have now and stuff. We 3-man bunks, and which was a canvas mattress, and you're 3 to 4 people high, and stacked in there. But it was interesting. It was sometimes fun, sometimes exciting, sometimes scary.
Do you still remember the names of the guys that were on your bunk?
No, not really. I think after we got out and the everybody kind of went their own ways, but there's a few people I know. I know my commander Herzer, and my wife was actually, while I was deployed at sea, she was the Enlisted Men Wives Club president of it, and the commanding officer's wife was also in there, to let them know what's going on and things like that. So, but no, I don't remember any. It was kind of you're on 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So when I'm in there, I'm sleeping, and so is everybody else. And then when you leave, another group comes in and they sleep. So, you just it's the way it was.
Where were you stationed?
San Diego, North Island.
And they would take off and do their missions and then come back and land on the aircraft carrier?
Yeah, I was, since I was an electronics technician, I worked there. I worked flight deck from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. All weather conditions, no matter what it was. And so some electronic radio usually, or something wasn't working right before takeoff, they'd call me to troubleshoot it. And I think that's probably was the scariest part of my whole career, because you've got 50 planes, props, turning, helicopters, a few jets, engines, that kind of change the wind factor on you. You don't know. Plus, you're working at night, no lights. I mean, that's completely dark a lot of times. and trying to, with everybody's moving around. Planes are moving, getting ready for takeoff. You know, they're kind of like shuffling. It's kind of like being on a, I tell people it's like, picture yourself on a football field, and now make it move forward and back and sideways to sideways because of the ocean. And then you've got planes moving all around on that football field, you know, trying to get in a position to take off. And then you're going from plane to plane, you know, if they call you to fix a radio problem or what. And sometimes you can't fix it. I think the actual scariest part of my job is they had a what's called a transponder, and it's in the back of the airplane. The only way to access that is through, we call it the hell hole. It's in the tail, and you go from the bottom of the plane back into the air, you know, the airframe section, and to get to it. Well, their transponder needed to be changed. While I was in there, somebody went to get a new transponder. I was up there unwiring it, the old one that didn't work, and they were moving the planes. Well, I really wasn't sure where I was at, you know, because I was working, and the guy gives me a new transponder. I change it out, and then all of a sudden the tail drops. Well, I couldn't get out, and what I realized is I was on the catapult, and they hooked up the tail and gave it pressure, you know, and I could hear the engines rev up. I'm going, we're going to take off. And I'm back here in the back, and it's not going to be a fun experience for me because it's all airframe, and you know, there's not a lot of padding. So I'm back there bracing. I'm talking on my mic. I couldn't hear anybody because earphones weren't working in my headset. And so I was back there. It seemed like a long time, you know, bracing. Then pretty soon the tail comes up, and I dive out of there pretty quick. And so we downed the plane and had to come back on and out. But yeah, I thought I was going flying, you know, with no shoulder straps or anything to hold me back, because you know they take off pretty quick. It shoots them out pretty quick.
So could they hear you then?
Yeah, they could hear me, which I didn't know at the time, and so yeah, it was a little scary. But the other part, you know, on the, like I said, you know, on the flight deck, you know, planes are moving, and you just had to be really aware of your surroundings. Your head was moving all the time, your eyes were moving, and you know, because you didn't want to be where you shouldn't be.
I can imagine that would be pretty disorienting, to say the least.
Yeah, at first it was, and you're on your own. I mean, the very first time, I mean, nobody's really showing you the ropes or anything. The first time I was out in the flight deck, I knew what to do, but you know, there was no lead person there to take you, so you're pretty much on your own, and hopefully you make the right choices.
Did you ever just like, or does anyone else just like stop and get sick, like, you know, from all the motion going on?
No, I don't think you have time.
No.
No.
I know, you know, sometimes you're sitting in a car and the car next to you backs up and all of a sudden you think you're moving.
Right, right. Well, you get a little, you feel the motion. Yeah, it's like I said, you know, you're on feels like you're just on a platform moving around, with everything moving around you too. So, you know, and plus you know, since I work nights, most of our operations did, you know, occur at night, but it made for some very interesting, you know, happenings, you know. So,
what about the weather?
Weather, that's another one. You never knew what you were headed to. I mean, we had beautiful days, and then we actually went through a typhoon. And that was interesting. So because the waves were breaking up to and above the flight deck, so you can imagine the flight deck's up 90 feet or whatever above sea level, and it's going down and, you know, breaking waves. So we had to chain down all the planes and grab as many chains as we could find and just change them. You know, we put as many as we could in the hangar bay, but the rest of them we had to chain them down on the flight deck, and we lost one, but that was misfortune. But you know, we could have lost a lot more.
So an entire plane went off the deck.
Yeah, they broke off the chains. They weren't tight enough, or I'm not really too sure what happened, but somehow it just it broke off the chains, and there it went. So.
Who lost rank over that one?
I don't know. Wasn't me.
Somebody.
Yeah, well, maybe not. I don't know.
So was it wasn't standard to keep them chained down all the time?
Yeah, it was. You know, when we're not having ops, we chain them down, but we only put like basic chains on them. But during severe weather and stuff, we get as many chains and as we can find that will fit and put them on just in case, you know, because one chain, there's a lot of stress on those. I mean, even though there are big, heavy, bulky chains, but you know, during that time we put as many as we could on them. You know. So we had to get them out of the chain locker, which is right off the flight deck. You just jump down on the catapult there, or not the catapult, the it was a little walkway, catwalk, and had a hatch there, and just full of chains, and we just grab them and throw them up there, and somebody else grabs them and starts tying them down.
So you're, if I understand this correctly, you're running up and down this flight deck that's topsy-turvy with waves coming over the top.
Well, we didn't have operations going on then.
Oh,
No. Yeah, that's we couldn't. It was just impossible. So yeah, we were just trying to save it, you know, get the planes and get out of the typhoon as best we could. And we were over by Vietnam somewhere. I couldn't tell you where, but we were in South China Sea, I imagine. Most of the time we didn't know where we were. So it was, we didn't get the full brunt of the typhoon, but we got, I can tell you they're pretty strong. Yeah, I don't really want to do that one again. In the mountains and have a passion for that, but I would like to see more parks and things. I would like to maybe go down to South America, and I would actually like to go back to Asia. I'd like to go back to Japan and China and go through that. Hong Kong was my favorite city. You know, we stopped there, and even Singapore. You know, go back there, take my wife and kind of show her some of the different places I went to while I was in the Navy, and you know, the Asian lifestyle, and show her, you know, just how different everything is.
Did you go into Vietnam when you were in the service?
No, we never set foot on land. I didn't, but you know, we had flights that went over there, but I never went over. I flew a little bit, but it wasn't that much.
Have you been there since?
No.
Is it on your list?
It's also on my list. Yeah. Well, one of our missions that I was going to talk about is we did recover one of the Apollo space flights, the capsule for that, and that was interesting. That was Apollo 16. I think it was Mattingly was the commander on that one. But we were out in the Pacific, and we were close by, and that was when it landed and splashed down in the Pacific. So we picked it out and brought the capsule and the crew, you know, back to the Ticonderoga. Actually, the helicopter squadrons did all that work, but we were on board too, and you know, that was kind of a proud moment because, you know, space travel still, you know, was another interest of mine, and you know, doing that. So we brought the capsule back, came back to San Diego, and then about a day or two later, I brought my wife and my son down to the hangar where the capsule was, so they could actually see a space capsule. And the space capsules aren't that big, and there was 3 people inside that, so it was amazing to me, you know, how cramped that was, but you know, and how small it was. I thought it was much bigger, but it was pretty small. But I brought them down there, and we saw the capsule, and took a few pictures of that, and then left, and maybe about 6 hours later, it exploded. So,
What?
Yeah, they were offloading the fuel on it, and something went wrong, and I'm not really too sure. You know, all I know is they're offloading fuel, and there was something sparked an explosion in the actual capsule, and the defueling equipment, blew up in the hangar and blew most of the hangar about. I think it injured about 40 people who were there. Nobody got seriously hurt, but which was fortunate. But that was a little exciting too, because the timing of it. But
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, so that was Larry Stanfield, who works here on campus. And then we also have Robert Robbins, who works also on campus. And he was in the Air Force beginning in 1969, and he continued in the Air Force till 1977. Robert was born and raised in Kansas City. He enlisted in the Air Force and went to technical school at Air Force Base in Texas to become a communications specialist. He enjoyed his 1 year at Whiteman Air Force Base, and then he went overseas to Guam. And so the interview talks also about his experience in Guam. So we have several segments from Robert, and then I'll have you come up and we'll talk a little bit as well.
My first permanent duty station was Whiteman Air Force Base, Knob-Noster, Missouri. Home of the, I think it was the 35th Strategic Air Command. But anyway, it was a missile base. I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that they had these missile silos throughout the Midwest, and that's where these missiles resided. And because of the fact that I was going to a missile base, there were certain types of security clearances that I had to have. And the security background checks started shortly after that. The FBI went around, they talked to some family members, they talked to our neighbor, and they talked to some of the people at the school that I went to. I graduated from Central High School. And so they did this background check, and because of the fact that I was on the missile base, I had to have a special security clearance, and it was called a PSYOP. It was top secret PSYOP clearance. PSYOP stood for Single Integrated Operational Plan, which means that I was going to be down in the room where they have the button that you push to launch the missiles. So they do an extensive background check for that. They did what was called a crypto clearance, and that was it was because of the communication and things that go out have to be encrypted. So I had a clearance for that, and things were going really well. I enjoyed my time down at Knob-Noster. So I spent 1 year at Whiteman, and then my next duty was overseas, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to this little small island in the Pacific called Guam, 35 square miles. And so I was stationed in Anderson. Anderson was basically owned by the Navy. It was a Navy island. The Air Force was only a very small portion of it. The one Air Force base there. We did have some B-52s that spent some time there. That was sometimes a stopping point for refueling for them. So I got an opportunity to see the B-52s. Well, while I was on Guam, having like I said, known that I could have the opportunities to get some better jobs if I worked hard enough, and if I did what I was supposed to do, the good jobs would come. Well, one of the jobs I got, because I was a good typist, I worked for a group called the Director of Operational Planning. And what they did was they planned the bombing missions in Vietnam. So even though I never set foot in Southeast Asia, I feel that I did play a major role in Vietnam, because I used to type what was called the frag orders. And these were the bombing missions for the B-52s. The Doppel people, as we called them, they were a lot of officers, Air Force officers. I think a couple of colonels and one general were part of that program, and then they had some captains and some majors. And they actually used to sit down with this. They had this extremely large table. I remember that, and they would have all these maps on this table.
And that's how they would determine what was going to be bombed. And we used to have to type up those orders and send them to wherever the departing station was from, where the bombers were going to be leaving from, so that they could have them. And we'd send those, type up those, and that's when we used paper tape machines to type and to send communications. I actually got a chance to work on one of the first computers ever made, the UNIVAC 1004. That was our first computer that we had at Guam. And that would send paper tape, it would send cards, and also magnetic tape, things that we probably don't even use anymore. But so I really did have a direct effect on what transpired in Vietnam, even though I never actually made it to Southeast Asia. And that was the first step in really in my kind of in my military career, because that kind of gave me an opportunity to move forward. And I thought, okay, I'm a good typist now. I can get a good job like this. Let me see what else I can excel at to maybe move me a little further. What the longitude and latitude were for the bombs. That was basically it.
So my question is, if you weren't overly familiar with the operations order, the first time you get one of these frag orders to type up, did it kind of hit you like, I'm typing up a bombing mission?
I never thought of it that way. I'm doing my job. I never thought of it being as a bombing mission. I'm just doing my job. That's all I'm doing. My job is to sit here and type, and that's what I'm doing, sitting here typing.
So you were pretty much able to disassociate with the other end of that.
Yeah, with the emotional, with the emotional portion of it. Yeah.
Because for all intents and purposes, that was your combat. I mean, that was.
Yeah, it was.
Those those fragos were your bullets.
That's right. They were my bullets. You're absolutely. That's the reason why when I remember when I started this stuff, I said, even though I never spent one day in Southeast Asia, I felt that I was a major part of the Vietnam War, and it was because of that. Yeah. Yeah, that was a large portion of the combat. And the thing that really did was it opened my eyes about the Vietnam War and how it was being fought, because it was a political war. That's my own personal opinion, but it was a political war. We could have actually gone in, bombed Vietnam off the map, and just won the war and walked away with a win. But because of some political issues, we were not able to do that, and therefore it drug on and on and on. A lot of, from what I feel, useless deaths, because I don't know if anybody ever kept track of it. I'm sure they have somewhere, but a number of our dead soldiers was from friendly fire, which is horrible, but I guess it's all part of it. But and they were useless deaths as far as I'm concerned. They were, but we had a reason to be there, because we wanted to maintain presence there, and we knew at that particular time, the Cold War was still going strong between us and Russia, and that's who, during Vietnam, that's who our main adversary was. It wasn't really the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army. It was against the Russians. That's what this was all about.
Working in communications, and it sounds like you had worked for some higher commands.
Yeah.
And then again at the embassy.
Yeah.
You're obviously aware of this Cold War going on.
Yeah.
What did you think about that, or did you ever feel like there was that danger out there?
I don't know, because it's kind of like I said, before, it was my job. It was just a job. To me, it was a job. And once I left that job, I forgot all about the military, and I forgot all about the wars and all that kind of stuff. As far as I was concerned, I was a civilian once I took that uniform off. And I only wore my uniform during the hours that I was at work. So the rest of the time, as far as I was concerned, I was just a civilian, because I did civilian stuff, I lived off base. I only spent a small portion of my time on Guam. I lived on base. I had a room in the barracks, but I never stayed there. I had a place downtown that I stayed. And when I got back to Richard Scabar, I had room on base, but I never stayed there. I lived downtown. You know, I was from Kansas City, so there was no reason for me. So basically, I was a civilian. As far as I was concerned, I was a civilian, just doing a military job. Because it was, to me, it was like, it wasn't like being in the Air Force. It was like getting up, going to work. And I just put on, instead of putting on this uniform, I put on a military uniform when I went to work. When I took it off, I'm not JCCC when I don't have this uniform on. So when I get home, I'm just Robert. And that's the way it was when I was in the military. When I get home, take that uniform off, I'm just Robert. I don't know, maybe, I don't know how I was able to disassociate the two, but I just did. I did. Never had any problems with my conscience about some of the things that transpired over there because, you know, I kind of knew that when it came to what was going on between the countries, that they would have shot me just as quickly as I would have shot them. So, you know, it's just, that's part of it. Just what the way it goes. Excuse me.
So you served more than one enlistment.
Yeah.
Do you ever wish you would have gotten out sooner or transversely stayed in longer?
You know, I guess it's because I, at the time, just after the time that I did it, I realized it was a dumb move to get out. I let my emotions get the best of me because I was mad. I was mad because they wouldn't allow me to cross-train, and I felt that if I was going to be in the military, I had to be a chief master sergeant when I got out. Otherwise, it was useless to stay there. You know, if I was going to stay for 20 years and be a staff sergeant, why not? Why would I want to do that? Not make any progress at all. And the prospects of my career field, that was highly possible. That I would have stayed for 20 years and still been a staff sergeant when I got out. I mean, I would have spent 16 years as a staff sergeant, which to me doesn't make sense. Not when I made staff sergeant with less than 4 years. I was under 3 years when I made staff sergeant. 3 years time in the service. So I was fast tracking. And that's what I wanted to do. I worked for it. I deserved it. They didn't give me anything. The military didn't give me anything. All they gave me was the incentive. And so I worked hard for what I got. And I knew that if I worked hard, I could get where I wanted to go, if they had allowed me to. But they didn't allow me to. They basically told me, you know, well, you can't do that. Well, if I can't do it, then I'm out of here. I'll see you later. Then now see how you get along without me. That was basically my attitude when they said, you know, you can't get along without me in the department. Well, if I'm out of the military, you're still gonna have to get along without me. And that was the thing that really upset me so, was the fact that either they didn't care about that or they weren't smart enough to realize and understand that, you know, we can't force you to stay here because you always have the option of getting out. And that's really what kind of turned me against the whole situation when I really thought about that. To think that either they didn't particularly care or they weren't smart enough to realize and understand it. Now, if you're not smart enough to realize and understand that you can't force me to stay here, why are you wearing the oak leaf and the star and I'm wearing stripes? when I'm smart enough to realize and understand that, you know, are we in the wrong spots? Should you be wearing the stripes and should I be wearing the oak leaf or the eagle?
Yeah, I think often there's a disconnect between officers and what soldiers need.
Yeah, you know, and not only what they need, but as soldiers, but as people. You know, as people. I'm a person, and I have ambitions, and that's what the military needs. It needs people with ambitions, and people that have goals and want to achieve those goals, and want to go about achieving them the right way, which is what I was willing to do. I was willing to work for anything that I got. And I'll tell you right now that nobody's giving me anything. Everything I got, I worked hard for. And that's that I learned at an early age. My father taught me at an early age that hard work is what gets you what you want and what you need. that's to do it. That's the way to do it, hard work. And so I was willing to put in the hard work. And I figured that I put it in.
Someone told a story. It's interesting, you know, all the things you've done and
Yeah.
been a part of. It's really amazing.
Uh,
I want to thank you for coming here and sharing that story with us.
I like to think that I had a real interesting life. I've enjoyed every moment of it, and I've lived it. So you know that's what makes it special to me is I've lived it, and I don't regret anything that I've done or anything that's happened. I feel like I've been really blessed, and that's what's important. That's what's important.
So now we've been blessed for you.
And well, I'm glad I was able to do that, and I hope I was able to do it in a way that people were able to understand what I was trying to get across.
Is there anything we've left out? Do you feel like we've?
You know what? I'm 68 years old, so I've lived a pretty long while. I've done a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things, and you know it's hard to sit down and put your entire life into a conversation because there's so much of it. And I feel that I've actually been able to live life, which is good. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. That I've been able to do that. So I don't know. You know, like I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about it. And you can tell I enjoy talking about it. Yeah. I do. I enjoy talking about it because those are memories and those are things that nobody can ever take from you.
Thanks a lot, Robert. One of the first clips that we saw with you, you mentioned finishing high school, and I think that was at Central High School in 1968. Is that right?
That's correct. I graduated in June of 1968.
Okay, in Kansas City. And in 1968 was also there was so much going on, the Tet Offensive and also the assassination of Martin Luther King. But I'd be interested to know what happened at your high school with that time period.
Actually, there were about 3 really African American schools, high schools, in the Kansas City, Missouri school district at that particular time. I think it was Lincoln High School, Paseo High School, and Central High School. And the day that Martin Luther King was killed, there were some major upheavals in the city. The rioting started, and it actually started across the street from Central High School, where I graduated from. And so we decided that, I was a senior that year, and there had been communications with the other high schools, and we decided that we wanted to express our concerns with what was going on. And we decided to stage a march. So we got together as students, and we marched arm in arm. Our school was the last school on the stop, and we marched arm in arm down to City Hall, and we had a conversation with the mayor of Kansas City, and it was regarding what was going on in the city at the time. The 60s were, there was major social issues going on in the city, and it was a bad time. It was really a bad time, and that was part of it. That was really part of it. I know there was recently a program that was on TV in Kansas City, and it was called 1968. And it was about a lot of the things that transpired during that particular year. That was a big year because, like I said, because of so many social issues that were going on at that particular time.
That's a program I haven't seen, but now that you've told us about it, I'm planning to look that up. And somebody must have done a documentary, but that's really fascinating. Another question I had is that we hear a lot about the health issues of veterans both from the Vietnam War, but also the broader Vietnam War period and the era that you were in. And so I just was wondering if you have anything to share with us about your experiences as a veteran that may have accessed health care or through the veterans hospitals, or just curious about any impressions you want to share with us.
Actually, I do. I was injured during my time in the military was another battlefield, by the way. I shot a weapon one time when I was in the military. That was to qualify basic training. But I did injure myself when I was at technical school at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. We were playing basketball. It's not really funny though, but we were playing basketball, and I went up and I came down with a rebound, and I actually fractured the bridge of my foot, and had to be taken to the hospital, had my foot set, and I wore a cast for a while. Well, as the years went along, even after I got out of the military, I never had any problem with it, but I don't know, probably some of the older gentlemen here can tell you, some of those aches and pains start to really affect you when you get older. And I developed degenerative arthritis in my left foot. And because I was in the military when it transpired, the military was responsible for it. So I still go to the Veterans Hospital, and I still get treated for that. I'm actually a percentage disability because of that, because I fell and fractured an elbow when my foot gave away. And this was just recently, like within the past 10 years. So, so I still receive treatment. I actually have an appeal in right now for additional benefits because of the fracture. Like I say, it wasn't in battle, but I was in the military at the time. I was serving the country when it happened. Yeah.
Thanks. And I know, Ty, you were planning on maybe having the audience ask some questions as well. I know we want to wrap this up by 8:30, but there is some time yet. And so maybe let's get situated with Dave and Wendy coming up to the microphones as well.
I'd like to say one thing. When y'all listen to Larry talk, I can't explain how dangerous what he did is.
About Larry Stanfield,
the second. When he was talking about on a deck of an aircraft carrier, until you've seen it and lived it, you can't explain how dangerous it is. I think it was just, 3 weeks ago, some young man got killed on the USS Ronald Reagan, got hit by on an aircraft carrier deck. And when he was saying that, it brings back lots of memories, but it was filthy dangerous. And he said he was working night check, and if you go back to history, you remember the Forrestal fire. That's 1967. The people that got killed were the night check crew. They were asleep in their berths when the fire broke out and the fire rained down on them. They couldn't get out. So what he did was probably as bad as you'll ever have to do if serving your country, working on a flight deck. And I'd like to thank you for that.
All right, so is it okay, Rachel, if I just read them? Okay, so we have a couple on here, so we'll start with Robert. How many frag orders do you think you typed?
Oh my God, I don't have any idea. We sent, I sent probably about 20 a night, 20 or 30 a night.
Wow.
And you worked 9 days, 3 days on, or three mids, 3 nights, and 3 days, and then you got 3 days off. So that's a lot of frag orders that I typed, an awful lot.
All right, this one's for Dave and Wendy. How do you cope with the lives lost? As you mentioned, lives lost were unnecessary.
It's not so much cope. It's. I'm sorry. I'll say it. Usually I'm so loud they don't have to use this thing. It's more a feeling until you go to the wall, and I'm sure I can see people here, at the same age group. They're gonna have friends on that wall, and they are. They're just gonna see them there, and you ask them, why did we do that? I mean, it's so hard with 1968 when we say the Tet Offensive. With the whole history, you read the Pentagon Papers, and you realize it was a lie getting into the war. It really was. I mean, I'm sure you could teach us to it. We were misled into the war, and then once you're in there, what do you do to get out of it? I mean, that was that great series on this. So it's not so much cope with it. It's just a little upset that we took 58,000 people, and when it's all said and done, they're gone, and we're sitting there talking about it. And that's really the way I feel about it. They're gone, and we're sitting there talking. Right. And nothing really changed because of that.
Right. That's probably the biggest thing, was nothing changed. Right. We were back in, we were out of Vietnam. The country went the way that they had, the way that it would have done without our intervention, but we left 58,000 people, or we lost 58,000 people that shouldn't have been lost. It was tough because these people that fought the war were at the prime of their lives. They don't take people that are, have led their lives, had their children, things are good, and then you go over and fight. You're in the prime of your life before you've had a chance to experience most of life. These people went out and lost their lives. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a tough thing to do, right. Tough to rationalize.
Robert, do you want to add to that at all? No?
No, not really. Yeah, because, as far as I was concerned, I do feel that we had a reason to be there. We just didn't take care of what we should have taken care of when we were there. And it was because of politics. Because we did need a presence there because the Cold War was going on. We had to monitor what was going on in Southeast Asia. And that was our position. That's where we were to do that. And we were finally couldn't do that. And that's because of the fact that we couldn't bomb above certain parallels, and that was our politics. Like I said, we could have went in there, we could have wiped Vietnam off the map if that's what it was about, but that's not what it was about.
All right, so here's one. In 1967, when Muhammad Ali refuses to report to military service, did that affect camaraderie amongst people in the ranks? Did you have views on Muhammad Ali or people's actions and conscientiously objecting? Was it something you talked about while you were serving in Vietnam? Any of you? Yeah.
I got to see Ali fight twice. Saw him fight twice in the Astrodome, but I do. Yeah, and boy, was he good too. But again, that's almost like asking when Elvis was drafted. He stood by his beliefs. He said he had no problem with the people in Vietnam. What do you say? How do you say it? I got no quarrel with the Vietnamese.
With the Viet Cong.
I got no quarrel with the Viet Cong,
right.
and he refused to fight. And he paid the price for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was in prison.
He was had his title stripped away from him and was imprisoned.
Robert, this one's for you. Did you want to address that at all? No?
On the fact that I actually was on Guam when he had the thriller in Manila. I was painting red stripes on a curb. I was at the communications center. But no, I didn't have any issues with that. Everybody had their thoughts about the war. And one of the things that I guess we have to remember is that Vietnam was the first war that was fought on TV. And that's really what brought it home to us, was the fact that we actually could come in after a day at work or after a day at school and sit down and watch this war being fought on TV before our eyes. And because of the nature of the fighting, the jungle warfare, and the fact that there was so much dense jungle there that we had to fight through, and the way they had to move us through that with the napalm and some of the other stuff that they used to try to clear the way for our fighters. But my way of battling, fighting against the Viet Cong was, after I took my physical, for my pre-draft physical, there was a gentleman that came out from the Marine Corps, and they needed volunteers for the Marines. This was in 1968, and Marines were dropping like flies, basically, in Vietnam. They would just keep being killed off left and right. And I had no desire to be in the Marines, because the guy came out and said, we need volunteers. Well, naturally, no one's going to volunteer. So he just went and picked out guys in the audience. You want to be a Marine, I know. You're going to make a great Marine, come on. And he just went through the room. And at that particular moment there, I decided that I wasn't going to be a draftee. And I went down that same day, and I actually enlisted in the Air Force in what was called the Delayed Enlistment Program, because I couldn't see myself running through the jungle, shooting at somebody that I didn't know, and having somebody shooting at me that I didn't know.
Yeah. Robert, speaking of your career, you mentioned in the video clip we watched that they didn't allow you to cross-train, and that was sort of reflective of your career in the Air Force. Why do you think you weren't allowed to do that?
They told me that was too important to the department. We had just started a new project. In 1977,
That's when the facsimile machine. I know everybody thinks faxes are just so simple now, but that's when facsimile machines were just being used quite a bit for communications because there were just certain ways you couldn't send stuff. If you wanted to send a diagram, it was difficult to type a diagram, and you didn't want to send it by mail. You didn't want to send it by courier, so you would send it by a facsimile machine. And each one of the individual offices throughout the country, and actually throughout the Air Force, they were actually purchasing their own fax machines. And come to find out that, well, how fax machines won't communicate with everything. So you have to have a system set up. So I was in the department called Network Integrations, and we actually set up the fax network for the first fax network for the United States Air Force. And that's the reason why they told me I couldn't cross-train.
What would you say was your best experience during your service? Yeah, both of you, all of you. Yeah.
Meeting her at the officers club. No doubt in my
Good
mind.
answer. Good answer.
No, you got to fly.
I got fireplace too.
Robert, what was your best experience?
I worked at the American Consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, for a year. And I don't know if you've ever been to that part of the world, but that is fascinating. I had an opportunity to travel through Turkey. Actually, I had an opportunity to travel through Europe and through Asia because, I don't know if everybody knows, but Istanbul is the only city that's on two different continents. It's on Asia and Europe. So I lived in Asia. No, I lived in Europe and I worked in Asia.
Well said.
And that was, to me, it was magnificent. It was fascinating.
Do you want to talk about your transition to civilian life after your military service was over? How did that go?
I'll go.
Okay,
Mine
yeah,
wasn't
go
a very good experience, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Can
Can you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
When I was discharged from the military, like I said, I had all these different security clearances. I had worked for the State Department. I had worked with the missiles. I had worked top secret crypto. And crypto was actually it was encryption. The messages that went out, they had these machines that would garble everything, and so nobody who was listening in on the line could tell what was being said or was being typed. So I had all these different clearances, and at that particular time, there was a group called TRW. That was they had headquartered in Southern California, Orange County. When I got out of the military, I had an extensive background as a supervisor and as a department manager. And I was looking for a job when I got out. And like I said, I was living in I just moved to Southern California in '77. And I called down for a verbal interview. And when I talked to the gentleman on the phone, after the discussion was over, he says, "We'd like for you to come down because you're exactly what we're looking for." Well, I don't think I was exactly what they were looking for because they didn't know what I looked like. Because, no, and I'm serious about this. When I got there and they saw who I was, the job was no longer available. And this was in 1977 in Southern California, Orange County. So I know the reason why I didn't get the job. And it wasn't because my credentials weren't sufficient. It was because of the color of my skin.
Right. How about you transitioning out of the military?
When I was ordered out here, I was at the Pentagon and spent 3 years there. Then I was sent out here to be the commanding officer of an installation. And once we got out here, like I said it during the talk, and like Robert just said, at this point there, I really didn't feel like it really wasn't being in the military anymore. Because I especially once I made the decision to retire. But this was a get up and, come on, I flew for the Navy. There's not a whole lot of Navy airplanes here. There's doggone no ships around here. This was get up every morning, put the uniform on, go out to the base, and do what we did at the base. And then 16:30, 1700, come back home, get undressed, go home, go teach my coach youth football, the things that we enjoy doing with the family. So once, after doing that for about 3 years, and I guess we were out of it 5 years before I retired, I told them I wanted to retire, and they were good enough to let me stay out of it for 2 more years in a recruiting command. And then by that the last 3 months of that, I was back commanding officer of the installation because everybody else was gone. I was in command of me. I mean, I was the only guy there, and they kept extending me. And finally, when it was over, it was just over. I mean, just hear the key, locks, hear the key, and being an officer, you retired fairly well. I mean, financially, there was no problems. We had no challenges there. So this was just, going from one job to another.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we'll do this as our last question, so we respect everyone's time. Someone in the audience was talking about taking a class where they learned about the Vietnam War, and they had a veteran teacher in that class. What lessons should we learn about teaching future history from your experiences, both in the Vietnam era and in participating in this project?
Teaching histories of what? I mean,
well, like, what should we learn from learning about the Vietnam era and your service, and by using these kinds of resources in our classes or in research? What's the significance, basically?
To me, it was like Wendy said, that these things, national decisions affect real people. It's very simple. We talk about it, but Wendy said it best. When I tell people about the military, I saw the little child here. I bet you any money she likes peanut butter and jelly. You cut the crust off, right? Well, that's what the military does. They want the best part of the bread, of the sandwich. The crust is the rest of you, the young and the old. They don't want that. Okay, and realize that when people are in the military, that's the best years of your life you're going to give them. Okay, there's a fabulous movie called the Best Years of Our Lives, post World War II movie, and that's what I would think. When we make national decisions, you're affecting people at the time that when it affects them for the next 60 years. And that has to be taught.
Mm-hmm. Robert?
To me, it's the opportunities that the military give you. You have an opportunity to learn, get an education. You can travel the world and see things that you would never imagine that you get an opportunity to see. And it teaches you about the history of this country and some of the things the country went through. And you get a better understanding of it, I think, of what it's all about. And those days, they have a major effect on things today. Mm-hmm. They do.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Appreciate those comments. And then just also thinking, it came up tonight that you all know people who are memorialized at the Vietnam Wall. So that's something, if any of you are taking courses on the Vietnam experience, to think about how the war is memorialized, both here in Kansas City, but also if you have a chance to go to Washington, D.C. And then it was really interesting in Larry's presentation. He talked about that even though he didn't set foot in Vietnam, it is still a hope that he has to go there. And I think that's probably motivated by wanting to think about the context of not only the 58,000 plus people who lost their lives from this country there, but there were millions of Vietnamese who lost their lives on the north and the south side. There were also, South Koreans who were there fighting. There were others as well from Southeast Asia. And so to think about it in that broader context, I think that's important. And when we get these different folks' experiences, we start to realize how much we don't know and how much more there is yet. So yeah, I commend the folks here really for putting out their experiences. I think it's super valuable for all of us as lifelong students, whether we're in a class or not.
Absolutely. And I want to thank all of you for coming, and especially our interviewees for sharing your experiences with us and for participating tonight. Rachel, for coming all the way over here to do this moderating work. Yes, Donnie.
So I just had to hear my voice on there, but you guys had to watch yourself on the big screen. What was that like?
Sorry?
What was it like watching yourself up there?
I've actually seen myself before being video.
In front of a group?
My family's a group session. No, really, I have an extremely large family.
Right. Well, go ahead, Wendy.
I was going to say, I did not see this before. This was my first time watching this. So it was kind of interesting to see which clips were pulled out to show tonight, because we tended to tell a lot of stories during our interview, and it was very interesting to see which ones were chosen. And it was kind of fun just to see the stories and how you guys edited them. It was really good. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed that.
Dave, do you want to add to that? Is it fun to watch yourself?
I'm getting old. I know that video shows it. Who was that old guy with the gray hair?
All right, well, again, I want to thank everyone for coming. If you're a student, I'll put a piece of paper up here for you to sign in. And again, thanks. And you can find these resources in our library.
Robert, thanks so much. It's great to talk to you. Enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Robert.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome.
Yeah, very much.